Hey, it's Nora, and lately I've been thinking about the government shutdown and its deeper impacts. Not only are 800,000 federal employees not getting a paycheck, but who are those people? And what does that mean for their systems, jobs, and lives? For example, deteriorating conditions in federal prisons. This hurts the guards that aren't getting a paycheck and the inmates in their charge, and is leading to serious safety concerns.
We once again are putting our correctional professionals in a dangerous situation, and it's only going to increase if this government shutdown continues on. This is about people's lives hanging in balance.
That's Tyrone Covington, a CO at Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City. We're going to hear a lot more from him later. During the shutdown, federal corrections officers are working without pay, which means there have been staffing shortages when people call out sick, safety concerns, and a reported increase in tensions between inmates and staff. Not to mention potential for longer-lasting issues, even once the government reopens. How? Let's dig into that. To start with, the Bureau of Prisons is part of the Department of Justice. It runs the 109 federal prisons in the United States. The BOP has almost 36,000 employees at facilities across the country and are responsible for 180,000 federal inmates. Rabbit hole. The Bureau of Prisons was created in 1930. By 1940, the agency ran 24 facilities for a little over 24,000 inmates. That number stayed more or less consistent until the 1980s, when criminal justice policy drastically changed the way Americans were incarcerated. The federal inmate population in the United States skyrocketed with the war on drugs and mandatory minimums. What most people know about correctional officers, or COs or prison guards, is from TV and movies.
Get your ass over here, Chapman, now, move it.
For the inside look, I spoke to these COs over the last week, who work at prisons across the country, and many of whom are involved in their union, the Council of Prison Locals. So what does go into the job? Well, a prison is set up like a small city, and officers' jobs are varied. There are teachers, nurses, and cooks, and then what you'd think of as a more typical prison guard, who patrol the recreation areas and the cell blocks. The COs I spoke to this week said the biggest misconception is that the inmates are locked up all the time and they're always separated by bars. In most cases, inmates are only in conditions like that for a handful of hours overnight. The rest of the time, the guards are right among the inmates, and for safety reasons, they don't have their own set of keys. They rely on another CO to let them back out. Here's Tyrone Covington again.
So you don't have control. Someone else has control of your every movement.
Most of the time, that's fine, and guards can keep everyone safe. But that close proximity can also become dangerous.
We had this inability to translate how serious, how dangerous, how urgent things are every single minute that you're inside a fence.
And that's when the government, of which they are employees, is functioning properly.
You're now not getting paid, but on top of that, you're already working in a very inherent, dangerous situation.
Another guard described it to me as degrading and disrespectful, that the federal government, as he said, is so nonchalant about the whole thing. They have the comfort of knowing that we're coming to work to do our jobs.
They're making the ultimate sacrifice with no say in the matter and no end in sight.
And to make matters worse, the COs I spoke to say the inmates know what's going on and they're using it to get to the guards. James Thomasy at Leavenworth U.S. Penitentiary points out inmates see weakness.
Another reason why you don't hear a lot of personal stories about correctional officers is because we don't want to get compromised or tell our stories so inmates know about it.
As Ian Dawson at Pekin Federal Correctional Institution put it, inmates have all the time in the world to figure out how to get to the guards, what gets under their skin. Or how Steve Markle at Terre Haute Federal Correctional Complex put it, inmates have 24 hours a day to study staff and find a way to get a reaction from them, poking and prodding. That's annoying at best and psychologically distressing at worst, but the shutdown also leads to real safety concerns. I should note here that the guards are not allowed to give specifics about the internal security at any specific prison, so these are general concerns. Much like we're seeing with the TSA, some guards are calling out sick because they're not getting paid. Not because they don't care about work, but because some need to find secondary jobs or can't afford transportation. The guards told me people are working double shifts, getting called in or mandated to work even when they're supposed to be off, and all that leads to some real exhaustion.
We have people I know sleeping in their vehicles, not being able to drive home because they're so tired from working 16 hours day in and day out. This shutdown is definitely causing impacts in the system that's already stretched and suffering.
And as Steve Markle put it, if you're not on your A game, you're going to have some problems working in a prison. To fill some of those staffing gaps, prisons are shifting correctional professionals from other departments, like nurses and teachers, to act as correctional officers.
One thing we've learned through the prison system is that consistency is important. And so every day you're taking someone from a different place, a secretary, a nurse, and placing them as correctional officers. That's not consistency. People like to have certain things the same way. And so when you start changing, every day is a different personality, it can become a catastrophe because you're going to have some standoff with inmates who are going to kind of be pushing back on every single day there's a change.
According to the Washington Post, which contacted union officials at 10 prisons, the number of officers not showing up for work has doubled since the shutdown began. They're reporting that Hazleton Federal Correctional Complex in West Virginia is seeing an extreme level of tension, with an increased number of assaults on officers there since the shutdown began.
We're now at that point of uncertainty of we're at a baseline of it not getting any better than where it is right now until the government is funded.
CO Ian Dawson points out that the shutdown pay gap could also leave guards more susceptible to bribes. If an inmate has been trying to work a guard to bring in phones, drugs, weapons, the lack of pay is a new vulnerability to tap into. And here's the really long-lasting impact. Even if the shutdown ended tomorrow, these guards tell me they're concerned about staffing levels.
Folks are retiring. Folks are leaving the agency. If I were a new employee coming in within a month or a year, I'd probably cut and run. I'd probably leave.
Staffing for the BOP was already in a tenuous position because President Trump issued a hiring freeze for the federal government, including the Bureau of Prisons, in January 2017. Months later, lawmakers asked the president to exempt the BOP from the freeze. Soon after, the freeze was lifted, but it left a serious staffing shortage. By June, there were serious safety concerns in prisons around the country. So that's where we were before the government shutdown. So now, if officers quit to find a job that, pays, or decide to retire early, it takes months to hire for those positions because of the security clearance process and the fact that it can be tough to find qualified people willing to do such a stressful and dangerous job. Now, speaking of security clearances, Don Druitt says that a key part of that background check is whether an officer has any debt. Their credit score is really important, and they say they can actually get fired if their credit score gets drastically worse because it theoretically puts them at a higher risk for bribery. So that's the scary part of the shutdown too. If the current guards can't pay their mortgages and car payments and credit card bills because they're not getting paid during the shutdown, Druitt says they could end up losing their jobs anyway. Not to mention, at the tail end of 2018, the president signed a high-profile bipartisan Criminal Justice Reform Act, the First Step Act. That would, among other things, ease some mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines and allow thousands of federal inmates to leave prison early with good behavior credits. But now, Don Druitt says it's not being put in place because the non-essential employees that would be working on it are furloughed. And even if the government reopened tomorrow, the impacts could last for months.
It makes it less efficient, it makes it more expensive, and it obviously makes it a matter of life and death, not dollars and cents for people that are doing it on a day-to-day basis. And I hate to say it, but the way things are going in D.C., there's no exit ramp right now.
And that's probably more than you wanted to know.